In these uncertain economic times, it's easy to be worried about protecting your wealth, your hard-earned savings, and your family's financial future. Plunging interest rates, the devaluating dollar, and political unrest constantly threaten what you have worked hard to earn and all that you own. That's why now it's more important than ever to protect your assets and have the money you need to make your dreams come true. Welcome to the Global Wealth Fortress Report with successful global entrepreneur and wealth preservation expert Joel Nagel. Joel's helped thousands of people just like you protect what you have so that you can make even more and make your every dream come true. So, sit back and enjoy Joel Nagel's offshore expert advice on how you can live the good life at a great price, where the sun never sets on your financial fortress.
Hi, this is Carter Clues, president of the Offshore Club, and welcome to Joel Nagel's Global Wealth Fortress Report. This is where you find out all about asset protection from America's #1 asset protection attorney, focusing specifically on your offshore needs. Joel, welcome.
Good morning, Carter. Good to be with you.
It's great to be with you again. And you are clearly in a much better spot than I am. I am in frigid 20-degree York, Pennsylvania. And where are you?
Well, I left frigid Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania the other day, but I'm in sunny Belize. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here, and it's a beautiful day, light breeze. Temperature is about 75 degrees.
Incredible. And folks, you too can be with Joel Nagel in Belize if you go to grandbayman.com and buy a beautiful Grand Bayman home. Is that right, Joel? Very simple, very easy.
I'm actually not out on the island right now. I'm in Belize City because I have some meetings here today. But I love Ambergris Caye. It's really one of the best places you could ever live or spend time. Belize City is more of the place to get work and get things done, and I have a lot of those types of things to do too. But it's nice to be anywhere in Belize this time of year in January because, like you said, back at least if you're from the Northeast corridor, like we're from, it's a whole different world.
That's right, and we're getting ready to be hit by snow. There you see it, folks. Go there, grandbayman.com. Get your property, move on down, and join Joel. Today, Joel, I want to talk about a subject that I get more and more emails about as the situation in the U.S. deteriorates, and that is offshore foreign residency and second citizenship. Okay, very important. People are very serious about it. They need to know what the advantages are to it, and also how they can maneuver into that position. Folks, here, if you want to. After we talk, not now, after we talk, just go to Joel's website, nagellaw.com, and see what I've circled there. You go to nagellaw.com, click on services. I circled it up. I love show and tell, Joel. I circled it up top in purple. When you get to that page, you'll see services where I circled in blue. Click on that, and that's the page you're looking at right here. And it's what Joel and I are going to discuss right now. Joel, I think we only have about 20 minutes, and so I know you have 5 topics on that page: ancestry, investment work, retirement, and economic citizenship. Today, if it's all right with you, let's tackle the first 3, okay? Ancestry, investment, and work, starting with the ancestry, then work, and finishing up on investment. Does it sound right to you?
Sure. I mean, I think, maybe even before we jump into the specific categories, first, the big concept, a lot of times people say, well, is this a new thing, that you can get another citizenship or residence? No, it's really not. I mean, if anybody wants to pull out their Bible, for example, if you go to the book of Acts, you'll find a very interesting segment of the book of Acts where the Apostle Paul has been attacked by a crowd and he's being beaten. And the Roman soldiers come and take him away. But then for causing the disturbance, they tie him up and they're about to whip him. And he asks a very intriguing question. He says, is it legal for you to beat a Roman citizen who has never even been tried of anything? And they're sort of dismayed and in horror. And the commanding officer says, "You're a Roman citizen?" And he says, "Yes, I am. I was born a Roman citizen." And the commander of the guard says, "Well, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship." So right out of the gates, you're dealing with two of the aspects we're talking about.
Yeah.
Apostle Paul says, "I was born a Roman citizen," so that's ancestry. And then the Roman citizen says, "Hey, I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship." That's economic citizenship, which I guess we'll talk about next week. But this concept's been around for a long time, and it's just in recent years, I think it's become more mainstream to talk about it, to think about it. 10, 15 years ago, if I would be at a conference, there'd be one sort of squirrely guy in the back of the room that wanted to talk about this subject. Now it's very mainstream. Everybody wants to talk about it, whether you just want to have it, and hope you never need it, or other people are actually thinking about expatriating, which you cannot, under U.S. law, expatriate if you don't have another citizenship. You can't give up your U.S. citizenship and become a stateless person. So, that's some of the background. I think it's important to understand, on this topic.
Which is pretty fascinating. And as I said, more and more, I'm glad you pointed out that 15 years ago, you didn't hear much of it. Now I get emails every day from people who are simply saying,
exactly,
I've had it. Then they look, and I don't want to get into politics, but they look at what's happening in Washington with the politicians today, and that convinces them more and more they need I think what you and I and a friend Mike Cobb call a plan B, escape route. And it's just that simple.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really, for most people, what it is. It's like an insurance policy. They hope they never need it, but it's always good to have.
It's always good to have. I mean, that's, as we've talked about before, I own 2 homes in Honduras, looking to buy another in Nicaragua, so that I have an escape route. So what do people need to do to get, first, let's draw the distinction between, and let me go back to your website here, foreign residency and a second citizenship. You're the expert. Draw the distinction for so people know exactly what we're talking about, maybe which one they want for themselves.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it is the right starting point, Carter, because some people need one, some people need the other. For some people, it could be one or the other. Residency allows you to go and live someplace, right? So, right. In the era that we've just been through with COVID, having a residency somewhere has allowed people to move to that country. For me, I have residency in in Portugal. So it was very helpful to have, because anytime I wanted to go back and forth between the States and Europe, and there were times when it was locked down on both ends. So literally, there were still a few flights going. I'd be on an airplane. There'd be like 6 other people. Why? Because, the Europeans couldn't come to the US and the Americans couldn't go to Europe. But I had Portuguese residency, so I could go to Europe. I had American citizenship, so I could go to the US. So it was helpful to have both. Now, keep in mind that residency is personal to you. So you've got residence, your spouse has residence, you can live there as long as you want. But when you die, for example, your residence dies with you. It's not something you can bequeath. You can't leave residency to somebody. And that's where citizenship comes in, because citizenship you can. If you become a citizen of a country, now all of a sudden your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, they can either, if they're born after you're a citizen, normally they acquire citizenship at birth based on ancestry, based on their lineage or parents. If you're already, let's say you got citizenship in a country today and your children weren't citizens of that country, they could go and apply based on your status. It's called family reunification. So it's pretty easy to get a citizenship if you've got that ancestral link. And for a lot of countries, particularly European countries, you can go back multiple generations, grandparents, sometimes even great-grandparents. And it's different when you're going that route, because instead of saying I'm applying for citizenship, you're saying, hey, I've always been a citizen. It's just never been recognized before.
Very good.
I'm a citizen because my parents were a citizen, or my grandparents or my great-grandparents were citizenship. And I'm applying to be recognized as a citizen. I'm not applying for citizenship. I'm saying I already have it. I'm just applying for recognition of it.
Essentially, activating. I'm activating my citizenship, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
What you're saying. Yeah. And let me real quick.
And the countries that have been the most famous for that have been Ireland, the UK, Italy, some of those countries, Greece, where a lot of ancestors came maybe around the turn of the last century. People's grandparents came, and they can show that and go back and claim it. Other people who were forcibly forced out of their homes. So a lot of the German countries, Austria, the Eastern European
Right.
countries, if your ancestors were forcibly resettled, a lot of times you can go back and claim ancestral citizenship, based on that. So
we have two types of what would you call it? Foreign. Well, we have foreign residency and foreign citizenship.
yeah, it's
Okay.
two ways to
Second,
plant the same flag, but they're slightly different.
slightly different. I think with both you get, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, with both you are entitled to certain privileges that come to residents and citizens only. Like in Honduras, if I become a resident, then they have a Trasero program where people over 60 get huge discounts on everything. And so residency has tremendous advantage as well as being a great escape route, plan B escape route, as obviously the citizenship, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is that you always have the right to enter and you always have the right to stay. Nobody can ever make you leave. So in that regard, residence and citizenship is the same. And you're right, once you have residence, you get a lot of perks. Like in Portugal, where I'm a resident, residents are entitled to free healthcare. So, that comes with residence, not necessarily citizenship. You can upgrade from residence to citizenship, but, it's not going to affect that. But where the distinctions come into play is generally residents can't vote. So if voting is an important thing, then you want to be a citizen. If getting a passport is important to you, then you want to become a citizen, because they might issue you a residence card as a resident, but you don't have a passport, unless you're a citizen of a country. So, and then as I mentioned, you can't bequeath residence to your children, but you can bequeath citizenship. So if it's something you think, hey, in the future, my grandkids might want to go to school in Europe, or might want to live in Central America, or might want to work in Asia, whatever it is, you're creating more opportunities for them by, going the extra mile and getting the citizenship as opposed to just getting residence. On the other hand, let's say you're retirees, you're not worried about that. You don't care about, passport. You don't care about voting. You just want to be able to, get on the plane every year, fly to Mexico, fly to Belize, whatever, and spend, 4 or 5 months there, and go home. You don't need to waste the extra time and effort and energy it takes to become a citizen. You can just get, one of the resident status that we'll talk about.
Yeah. All right. So we've got the two approaches. Let's talk about, and on your website, you have 5 methods to obtain foreign residency or second citizenship. Let's tackle the first 3, ancestry, investment, or work. First ancestry, then work, then we'll finish up on investment. What is the approach with the ancestry? I guess you pretty much hit. You have to do a family tree search or something to find out if any of your relatives were born there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes people refer to it as, the sperm lottery. Sorry for using that term, but there's nothing you can do to impact that, right? It's
Right.
how you were born, where you were born, and if it turns out that, your grandmother on your father's side was Italian, then, we search that path, connect the dots, and you claim your citizenship based on that. So there's lots of people that can qualify, but there's many people who can't. And it's, it's mostly a science. It's a little bit of an art to sort of finesse it and look at the different avenues. We have people, for example, as I said, that were displaced from countries like, the Habsburg Empire from Austria when it was an empire, let's say in the early part of the, 20th century. So, they might have lived in what's now Croatia or Serbia, or, those countries. But at that time, it was part of Greater Austria. So we can, connect those dots and go back and try to claim Austrian citizenship because that's considered to be more desirable. So, But
Right.
again, it comes down to either you qualify or you don't. So you don't have to really spend a lot of time thinking about it. If you have parents, grandparents, in some cases maybe great grandparents that come from a foreign country, we can look at that country, see what the rules are, and you can figure out pretty quickly. If you do qualify, it's great because it's pretty fast and it's also cheap, right? Because again, you're not applying to become a citizen, you're claiming citizenship that you say you already have.
Yeah.
And so it's the best of both worlds, but only if you qualify. And if you don't qualify, then you have to go on to one of the other options. So
and you might want, and let me say that folks, you might be very wise to check with nagolaw.com, because I've tried to read. My mother was born in Italy, my grandparents, and it's not quite as simple as just you start reading it and you say, wait a minute, is that so? Nagolaw.com is a good place to check on that to see if you meet the family tree criteria.
Yeah. And sometimes just getting the records is the hard part, Carter, because it's really just a modern it's just a modern era where all records are maintained by governments, right? If you go back before World War II and certainly before World War I, countries like Italy that you mentioned, those types of records weren't maintained by governments; they were maintained by the church. So you have to go back and try to connect the dots and find out the church in some little town in the middle of nowhere that's where you came from, and get the church leaders to say, yeah, this person was born here, baptized here, and then they emigrated to the U.S. in this year. And again, once you can establish that, you can go back and claim ancestral citizenship.
Great. All right. So that's number one. The second one we want to talk about today, the 3 of the 5 we're going to talk about today, folks, is work. The work citizenship. What work, residency, or citizenship? How do we get that?
Excuse me. So again, it's very country specific, whereas ancestral is based on where you're from. The residence based on work depends on the rules of that country. So you have to go to the country you're thinking about, see what's their position on people with my background. It could be based on your academic skills, your entrepreneurial skills that you can qualify. You have different rules in different countries. Like, for example, Germany after World War II made it a program specifically for Americans. So if you're Canadian, Australian, it doesn't apply. But if you're American, they've made it easy for people to come and say, hey, I want to work in Germany. And you can kind of get your job first and then turn around and use the job to get your residence. In many other countries, you have to, if you're going the work path, you have to, basically find an employer who will sponsor you and say, hey, we need this person. They have this kind of technical skill. The more skills you have, the more degrees you have, the more experience you have, the easier it is. Now, if you live in the States and you have a company, for example, sometimes what you can do is you can have your U.S. company open up a branch or subsidiary in another country, and you can be transferred there. Like an employee, you can say, hey, our company in the U.S. it has a subsidiary in Belize, and we need to transfer you from our Michigan plant to our plant outside of Belmopan. So there's ways to do that as well. But the rules, again, are country specific. So you start by saying, hey, Joel, I'd like to go to wherever, you name the country, Costa Rica. And then you have to work backwards and say, okay, what are the rules there? Now, again, the more skills you have, the easier it is. If you just say, hey, I'm retired and I'd like to go, pour drinks on the bar at a bar in, San Pedro, Belize, you're going to have a very, very difficult time, getting a residence permit based on that. Because again, in that situation, you'd be sort of displacing a local worker, and they don't want that. So again, you have to look at the specifics in each country. But usually there is a workaround. It's the old saying, where there's a will, there's a way, and you just have to figure out what that is.
Let me ask you this: what about teaching English? Let's say if I say to the Honduran government, look, I have a license to teach English to Spanish speakers. Do you think, in your experience, is that one that they say, well, yeah, we kind of need that over here.
Yeah, for sure. It also depends if you're doing it as a employee or as a volunteer. A lot of times the
Right.
rules for volunteers are different. You know, medicine is another great example. You know, if
Yeah,
let's say
sure.
you've retired from the U.S., you know, you got kind of fed up with all the bureaucracy, but you're financially, you know, you have decent financial means and you're
Right.
willing to go volunteer in workplaces. You have organizations like I'm very involved with Rotary International, and we have a whole program to sponsor and place doctors to go anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months to a couple years into different countries. Usually you don't get paid money, but you might live with a family, or they might provide accommodations, or meals, or a small subsidy for things like that. But you're really going there as a volunteer, and when you're willing to do that, then again, a lot of times the organizations that are involved with, they take care of the paperwork for you. Yeah, frequently, if you want to go down and volunteer, it can be easier than getting a work permit, because again, you're not taking a job away from anyone. But in your case, you're teaching English, and if they need that, again, maybe you get a school that says, "Hey, we really want Carter to come here. They're even going
Hmm.
to pay you." Then the application comes from them rather than you. They just say, "Hey, we need more native English speakers," and usually that's not a problem to get that kind of residence.
That's great. All right, for the folks who just tuned in, we're talking about how you can obtain foreign residency or second citizenship in countries outside the U.S. We're talking with America's #1 asset protection attorney, Joel Nagel, on the Global Wealth Fortress Report. We've talked about using ancestry as a criteria. We've talked about work as a criteria. Let's finish up with Joel with how to use investment to get a foreign residency or second citizenship.
Yeah, that's a great question, Carter. I mean, again, the countries have their own specific rules. Some programs are better promoted than others. Some countries are promoting just the residency side. Some are promoting the citizenship side. But most countries do have programs. I mean, even the United States has an EB-5 and E2 visa, that is designed for people of means who are going to come and invest in the U.S. If it creates jobs, and you invest whatever the threshold amount is. In the U.S., it's 1.8 million, so it's rather high. There are economically depressed areas where it's half that, so it's 900,000. The countries around the world, the investment amount tends to have a relationship to the level of development of that country. So
Right.
if you go to a country like Austria, where I have a lot of personal knowledge and experience, it's one of the highest investments in the world. It's about 7 million euros, which right now is about $8 million. So that's not for everyone. They don't want everyone. You have other countries, in Latin America, where it can be $50,000, $100,000, $200,000. In some countries, the purchase of a home qualifies as the investment itself. So that can be pretty helpful, because if you want to go to a country, you're probably going to need a home anyways. So if you look at those countries and say, I'm going to buy a piece of property, I'm going to live there, then the residency comes with it. In some cases, the citizenship even comes with it. The countries that I would just mention in that regard would be the Caribbean countries like Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Kitts. Those countries, for anywhere from a little bit over 200,000 up to $500,000 of investment in the form of real estate is going to get you citizenship. Now, other countries, the investment doesn't get you direct citizenship; it gets you direct residence. Portugal, for example, I keep coming back to that. I love Portugal. It's a very easy country to get residence. You make your investment, you buy your property, and that gives you residence. It doesn't give you citizenship; it gives you residence. But after you've been a resident for 5 years, then you can apply for citizenship. So a lot of the programs, they don't give you instant citizenship like the Caribbean ones I just mentioned, which do, but they give you instant residence, and then that leads to citizenship, over a period of time.
And what about the figures? When you start getting up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars, a lot of our members, they're not in that range where they want to do that. But you did mention some where as low as 50,000. I know Honduras, I think, is even less. What are some of those where you can make an investment and get the residency or citizenship for those kind of numbers?
Yeah, again, it tends to be more the resident side than the citizenship. Right. The citizenship programs, direct citizenship, starts at about $100,000. Again, those are the Caribbean ones. But the residents can be lower, can be, again, 50,000, even 30,000. Dominica has a residence program. I think they just made some changes to it. It was 35,000.
Right.
Panama was by far the lowest at 5,000, but they just increased it recently. So, I know that next week we're going to talk a little bit more about like one of the elements is retirement. Sometimes the retirement income can be used as the investment, since we're talking about investment this week. So it's not necessarily even a question of how much you invest, but how much you have available. Belize has a program in that regard. It's called the QRP. We'll talk probably about it next week. But you have to show you have $2,000 a month of retirement income that you're able to spend, in the Belize economy. So you're making the investment rather than an upfront lump sum investment. You're making it as an over time investment. So those are all the programs that offer that. And it's not only just real estate. Sometimes you can invest your own money in your own business. So, it's not like you're writing a big check to the government like some of the programs are. In some cases, you're just using your money to capitalize a business. And as long as you're going to capitalize that business and run it, some countries like the US have rules concerning how many employees you have to hire, but other countries don't. They just allow you to come in, start a business, you capitalize it. You could spend the money on whatever you want to make the business successful. If that means employees, it means employees, but could mean capital investment or leases, renting, office space, whatever it is. So a lot of these programs, the countries use them, the residents, as sort of a hook or maybe the icing on the cake to get a foreign investor to come. Because, if you're going to come to a country and invest money there, you want to make sure that you're on an equal footing with the citizens and other residents there.
Right.
You can't be told, hey, you can't come into the country. You're a tourist, you have to leave. You're not going to invest money in that scenario. So a lot of these programs, the connection between the residential and the residency, and the investment, it's a very clear link. I'm not going to invest without getting the residents. I'm not going to get the residents without the investment. So, they do go hand in glove.
So, and my advice, based upon what you're saying here, my advice, and correct me if I'm wrong again, my advice would be threefold, folks. Look, if you're looking for your plan B escape route, or you just, want to get a residency and live offshore, not to escape just because it's going to be as we always say at the Offshore Club, the good life at a great price. Do your research, do your homework, study it online. You can contact the embassy. Now, Joel, my experience, again, it's with the Honduran embassy. You're not going to get a lot of information from the embassy, especially if you don't speak Spanish with a lot of these Central American countries. Check it out yourself, give it a try. Then when you really get to the nitty gritty and it's time to say, I have to make some serious decisions here, this is the gentleman to get hold of, nagolaw.com. It's just that simple, folks. You always play all your cards. So, Joel, thank you. This has been great advice. This has been great advice.
Thank you, Carter. I look forward to continuing the discussion next week.
On our next two. All right. And folks, thank you for joining us. And we will see you again next week on Joel Nagel's Wealth Fortress Report. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.